Good afternoon. Welcome back to Salam Media. You still tuned in to your humanitarian journalism portal, and news just in. I think very, very important, very big news coming out from the ICC. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has applied for arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas leader in Gaza Yahya Sinwar for war crimes. And this is news that we're getting right now. I think it was about 3 hours ago that this was announced. And to break it down for us is activist and lawyer from Fredericks Incorporated, Moulana Salmaan Fredericks. Moulana, jazakallah for giving us your time. Welcome to Salam Media. And really, big news coming out of the ICC.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan for having me on air. And yes, it is, I suppose, progressive news coming from the ICC. How progressive? We will have to see. We can see and tell it takes about 2 months for a arrest warrant to be issued, should it be successful. So I suppose we'll have to see whether or not the ICC is weighing in on the justice that is needed in Gaza.
I think if there's one thing that it's always a question mark is what does it take for a criminal record, for the application of a criminal record to be granted? Well, what are some of the things that, the judicial system looks at to ultimately give that warrant of arrest?
So very much like a local court process, the international court of course, is subject to its own rules and laws, and there would have to be a prima facie case against such an individual that requires investigation. The individual will, of course, have to go on trial. There are not many cases where European leaders have stood trial for war crimes, with the exclusion of what we know was perpetrated in Bosnia. So this, of course, is a big move, I think, more so politically, that we find someone from the Western world, Netanyahu in this case, an application being brought forth for his arrest.
And I think, when it comes to the ICC, if there's one thing that always jumps, into people's faces regarding the court is the issue of jurisdiction. How does the ICC establish jurisdiction over Gaza, East Jerusalem, and maybe the West Bank, despite Israel and the United States not being members of the ICC itself?
So yes, of course, we understand the weight of this arrest warrant. I think we should not feel that there is groundbreaking in the sense that Netanyahu will be arrested tomorrow. That's certainly not going to happen. And of course, Israel and the United States is not a party to the ICC. What this does mean, though, is it symbolizes a degree of restriction on the movement of Netanyahu. So he has well-established networks across Europe, whilst the United States might not be a member to the ICC, and it has no obligation to enforce that to a degree. At least within Europe, European nations have an obligation towards the ICC, and this, of course, would make travel for Netanyahu incredibly difficult. We've seen this in our own country with President Putin being unable to attend BRICS in person. We understand the level of controversy it created as to whether or not he would attend in person or not. And South Africa had to craft a very skillful way to still appease Russia and yet appease Western powers in relation to the obligation to the ICC. So it's not a victim in the sense that we're going to see Netanyahu stand trial anytime soon. We know the process of the court takes years, but this certainly is going to be a symbolic blow to the president of the prime minister of Israel, at least.
And with Benjamin Netanyahu, warrant of arrest is also issued for Hamas leaders in Gaza. What can we deduce from this? What can we get, from that application? Also, is it warranted? From how you're looking at things?
Well, look, if somebody perpetrates war crimes and they can be held responsible for those war crimes, it is regardless as to whether or not their political suasion is in my favor or not. There's no bias in relation to national law, and there ought not to be. But of course, we know international law within an international platform does not work that way. This is certainly the ICC trying to appease Western powers as well. Hamas is not a state signatory to the ICC, and it is recognized. And certainly, if we were to accept on the Israeli narrative of what had occurred on 7 October for that to be true, certainly it in no way is in the same depth and weight of what they've perpetrated over the last 7 months in Gaza. Needless to say, I think just as much as the ICC arrest warrant will have limited application on Bibi, it's going to, of course, have limited application on the leaders of Hamas. Ismail Hania is positioned himself in Doha. Highly unlikely that he'll be leaving. Yahya Sinwar is somewhere in the tunnels, either between Gaza and Syria, we don't know, and nobody knows what Mohammed Taif looks like. So, from a practical perspective, very little application, but I think it was important for the ICC, or at least for them, to position themselves as a neutral, just judge in this particular process.
If you can focus a bit on, the ICC itself, I think, there's been a lot of criticism with how, it has dealt with, previous cases, and how usually it wouldn't go, as aggressive when it comes to Western leaders. As you previously, mentioned that it's very unprecedented to have a leader from the Western world to, have an application of a warrant of arrest against them. But as an organization itself, the ICC, can we still look at it as, a credible, impartial institution that we can, look at it and say, it's still for justice, and there can be a positive outcome when all is said and done?
So this is quite interesting, and there's been a lot of criticism of the ICC, and I think justifiably so that there's been criticism of the ICC. Our own government wanted to withdraw from the ICC, and there's been a history of persecution of African leaders under the watch of the ICC and none under the Western world. But what I do think has changed is that as much as we have leveled this criticism against the ICC, member states of the ICC have not brought often enough and in quick succession allegations of human rights abuse or war crimes committed by the Western world. We have not actually followed the process, and I think what South Africa has done is we've actually followed through. I mean, there's been applications at the ICJ and the ICC, but sparsely fair in between, around the occupation of the West Bank and the wall and the like, and there's been opinions issued on those particular issues. And I think we're now seeing a move from other global South parties participating and joining the application at the ICC. We see applications being considered for the ICJ. I think we must actively pursue the route of the ICC and the ICJ, regardless of what we feel about its bias. It is evident to us that there is a bias in the global North against the global South and its leaders and its countries. But we must show them for the hypocrisy that we've always known to exist. So even within their own platforms, within their own fora, we must show them to be hypocrites. I think it's a very important exercise that we go through.
And unlike the Hamas leaders, Netanyahu is a head of state, and he holds diplomatic ties, with other world's leaders out there. How do we see this, application for his warrant of arrest going to impact his presidency and his day-to-day, diplomatic work with other world's leaders?
I think it's immensely embarrassing for him. Immensely embarrassing. This is why before, around April already, when Khan was investigating the possibility of bringing an application of an arrest warrant, there was this pressure placed by the United States and Israel against staff members of the ICC, because it is incredibly embarrassing for him as a leader of a democratic world in the Middle East, when everyone else is far away from democracy. I also think that if we look at what's happening in Israel internally at the moment, or the occupied 1948 area, there's internal strife. People are fed up. Thousands of people went to march seeking Netanyahu's resignation because he had failed to bring back the hostages. It wasn't about bringing back the hostages. We see now his war cabinet is also taking different positions as to the outcome of what should happen. The Minister of Defense doesn't want to have a presence of Israel in Gaza after troops have been taken off the ground. And so other ministers have also threatened to quit the government from the 8th of June of this year. So clearly things around him are falling apart. The House of Cards is falling apart. And I think this is just an additional blow. Should that arrest warrant be issued, I think it's really going to jeopardize his political career. Back home, he already faces threat from the judiciary for internal corruption. To have this happen on an international scale is just one other blow that I'm not sure he would be able to stand up to.
And just lastly, is this going to be, having any kind of impact when it comes to the ongoing genocide that is perpetuated by the Israeli occupying forces in Gaza at the moment?
Well, we see the current application for the genocide brought by South Africa at the ICC has had no implication or effect on Israel's desire to commit the genocide. There is still a complete denial by the United States as to the occurrence of a genocide, as well as European countries, particularly Germany. So the arrest warrant is not going to have any impact as to whether or not Benjamin Netanyahu decides to retreat from Gaza. I don't think so in any aspect. I think at this stage, they're trying to seek a victory, and they're uncertain as to what that victory is. Initially, it was bringing back the hostages. Doesn't seem that the hostages can be brought back without a negotiated peace deal. Benjamin Netanyahu does not want to negotiate a peace deal because his caucus, his constituency in the far right in Israel want him to continue the genocide in Gaza. But on the other hand, the liberals and the more moderates want to find international recognition, and so they hear the voice of the United States, who says, don't enter Rafah. It is the voice of European nations that say that this is unacceptable. We need to protect the civilians. So it is a bit of a conundrum. And I think ultimately he's putting his political survival above everything else. So the 35,000 people that have died, his own constituency back home, his political survival is the most important to him.
And I'm sure also, looking at the United States and, the Joe Biden administration, which enjoys very close ties with Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm sure this would also kind of put some kind of pressure onto them, especially with how, Americans back home have been kind of growing very conscious of the relationship that Israel enjoys with the US. I'm sure that's also going to be having some kind of impact.
Certainly, and I think, where we find the voice of justice emanating is in Biden's traditional constituency. It's not Republicans that are against the war. Republicans are supportive of Israel. They want the war to continue. You see attacks on students at campuses throughout the United States by Republicans and the far right. And it is what has been the woke generation, the socially just aware generation of the Democrats that have been raising their voice. And I think it's really going to cast a blow on Biden's re-election, because it is that constituency that are not necessarily going to go vote for Trump should he prevail as the Republican candidate, but they're certainly not going to vote for Biden. Most likely they will stay away.
And what can we look forward from here? You did mention that this processes take a few months, but after that, what's going to be happening? The application has been sent out. It's been seeked out. What happens? What's the next process? And how is that decision going to be made on whether or not it will be granted?
So, we only need to look at the practical implication in relation to the arrest warrant issued against President Putin. President Putin is not particularly popular amongst Western leaders. He does not need to travel to Western countries, but he was re-elected president of Russia despite warrant arrest being issued against him. So similarly, I think it's going to have minimal impact on Benjamin Netanyahu. Safe to say that he has a very strong political opposition back home. People are fed up. There's a war, it costs money. The Democrats are also suffering support as a consequence of their continued support of this war. So it's going to be more a political impact for Benjamin, as opposed to a practical implication of him being arrested. It might limit his ability to travel to certain Western countries. But nevertheless, he will be living his life in luxury and comfort in Israel as he has before.
No, thank you so much, Moulana Salmaan Fredericks. We're going to let it go, leave it here. I'm sure, when there's other developments, we'll definitely get in touch with you and try to break them down.
Jazakallah khairan wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I mean, that was activist and lawyer Moulana Salmaan Fredericks, just giving us some insight on that International Criminal Court seeking an arrest warrant for Israeli and Hamas leaders, but particularly the one that stands out is for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So yeah, I think this is going to be a developing story and one that we'll be keeping a close eye on. But for now, we're going to be wrapping it up until we meet again. Goodbye.